Question 1. What factors determine Amgen's ethical and regulatory obligations when launching a new pharmaceutical therapy in the United States, particularly concerning the accuracy and completeness of information provided to healthcare professionals and the public? Option A. The primary factors are the projected market demand for the new therapy and the competitive landscape, as these will dictate the necessary marketing strategies to achieve Amgen's commercial objectives. Option B. The primary factors are the internal company policies on sales targets and the discretion of the marketing department to adapt messaging based on feedback from key opinion leaders in the medical community. Option C. The primary factors are the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, regulations governing drug promotion, including requirements for truthful and non-misleading labeling, fair balance of risks and benefits in advertising, and adherence to approved indications. Option D. The primary factors are the general principles of corporate social responsibility and the company's philanthropic initiatives, as these demonstrate Amgen's commitment to public health. The correct answer is C. The primary factors are the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, regulations governing drug promotion, including requirements for truthful and non-misleading labeling, fair balance of risks and benefits in advertising, and adherence to approved indications. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's strategic objectives with the ethical and regulatory obligations surrounding the development and marketing of a new pharmaceutical product. The pressure to achieve market success for Amgen's innovative therapy must be weighed against the imperative to ensure patient safety and comply with stringent regulatory requirements. Careful judgment is essential to navigate potential conflicts between commercial interests and public health responsibilities. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of all relevant factors, prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance throughout the product lifecycle. This includes rigorous clinical trial design and execution, transparent data reporting, and adherence to all pre-market and post-market surveillance requirements. Specifically, for Amgen, this means ensuring that all promotional materials accurately reflect the approved indications and safety profile of the new therapy, as mandated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, regulations. This approach upholds the ethical duty to provide truthful and non-misleading information to healthcare professionals and patients, fostering trust and ensuring appropriate use of the medication. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing market share without adequate consideration for regulatory guidelines would be professionally unacceptable. This could manifest as overstating the benefits of the therapy or downplaying potential risks in marketing efforts, which directly violates FDA regulations concerning prescription drug promotion. Such actions not only risk regulatory sanctions, including fines and product recalls, but also erode public trust in Amgen and the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market over thoroughness in post-market surveillance. While timely access to new treatments is important, neglecting to actively monitor for and report adverse events after a drug is approved can have severe consequences for patient safety and lead to significant regulatory penalties. This failure to fulfill post-market obligations, as required by FDA regulations, demonstrates a disregard for ongoing patient well-being. A third incorrect approach would be to engage in off-label promotion, encouraging healthcare providers to prescribe the therapy for uses not approved by the FDA. This is a serious regulatory violation and poses significant risks to patients who may not benefit from the drug in unapproved contexts or may experience unforeseen side effects. Amgen has a responsibility to ensure its sales and marketing teams adhere strictly to approved indications. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multidisciplinary team, including legal, regulatory affairs, medical affairs, and commercial departments. This team should establish clear ethical guidelines and standard operating procedures that align with FDA regulations. Regular training and ongoing monitoring of all promotional and marketing activities are crucial to ensure compliance. In situations of uncertainty or potential conflict, seeking guidance from regulatory experts and prioritizing patient safety and ethical conduct over short-term commercial gains should be the guiding principle. Question 2. Process analysis reveals that Amgen is preparing to launch a new biologic therapy, A marketing team proposes developing promotional materials that emphasize the drug's innovative mechanism of action and potential for improved patient outcomes. But these materials do not explicitly detail all potential side effects or contraindications, nor do they fully address the drug's approved indications versus potential off-label uses discussed in early clinical trials. What is the most appropriate course of action for Amgen to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements for pharmaceutical promotion? Option A. Proceed with the proposed promotional materials after a brief review by the marketing department to expedite market entry, as the focus is on the drug's novel benefits. Option B. Develop promotional materials that present a balanced view of the biologic's benefits and risks, strictly adhering to the approved labeling and indications, and undergo a thorough review by legal, regulatory, and medical affairs teams before dissemination. Option C. Create promotional materials that highlight the drug's potential for off-label uses discussed in early trials, as this demonstrates the full scope of its therapeutic possibilities. Option D. Focus promotional efforts on the drug's innovative aspects and potential benefits, assuming healthcare professionals will independently research and understand the full spectrum of risks and approved uses. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the proposed promotional materials after a brief review by the marketing department to expedite market entry, as the focus is on the drug's novel benefits. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires navigating the ethical and regulatory landscape surrounding the promotion of a new pharmaceutical product, specifically Amgen's new biologic. The challenge lies in balancing the imperative to inform healthcare professionals about a potentially beneficial new treatment with the strict regulations designed to prevent misleading or off-label promotion. Careful judgment is required to ensure all communications are accurate, balanced, and compliant with the specified regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review process that prioritizes scientific accuracy and regulatory compliance. This approach is right because it ensures that all promotional materials for Amgen's new biologic are factually correct, supported by robust clinical data, and adhere strictly to the approved labeling and indications. This aligns with the core principles of pharmaceutical marketing regulations, which mandate truthful and non-misleading information and prohibit off-label promotion. By involving legal, regulatory, and medical affairs teams, the company establishes a robust internal control mechanism to mitigate risks and uphold ethical standards. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on highlighting the novel aspects of Amgen's biologic without a balanced presentation of risks and limitations would be ethically and regulatorily flawed. This failure stems from a potential violation of regulations requiring fair balance in promotional communications, which necessitates disclosing both benefits and risks. Another incorrect approach that involves tailoring promotional messages to suggest uses not explicitly approved by regulatory authorities would constitute off-label promotion, a serious violation that can lead to significant penalties and harm to patients. Finally, an approach that bypasses internal review processes to expedite market entry, even with good intentions, would be unacceptable, as it undermines the established safeguards designed to protect public health and ensure compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory framework. This involves identifying all applicable laws, guidelines, and internal policies. Next, they should assess the potential risks and benefits associated with any proposed communication or action, considering both patient safety and regulatory compliance. A critical step is to seek input from all relevant stakeholders, including legal, regulatory, and medical experts, to ensure a comprehensive and compliant outcome. Finally, professionals must maintain a commitment to ethical conduct, prioritizing patient well-being and scientific integrity above all else. Question 3. The control framework reveals that the Amgen hiring assessment test has specific jurisdictional requirements that must be strictly adhered to. An employee is unsure about the precise interpretation of a guideline related to the scope of permissible references during a problem-solving scenario question. The employee is under pressure to complete the assessment efficiently. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to ensure compliance with the Amgen hiring assessment test's regulatory framework? Option A. Consult the designated compliance department or the official documentation for the Amgen hiring assessment test to seek clarification on the specific guideline. Option B. Proceed with the assessment by interpreting the guideline based on general industry knowledge and the need for efficiency. Option C. Make a reasonable assumption about the guideline's intent and proceed, noting the assumption in the answer. Option D. Ask a colleague who has previously completed the assessment for their interpretation of the guideline. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the assessment by interpreting the guideline based on general industry knowledge and the need for efficiency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Amgen to navigate a potential conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet performance targets can create an environment where shortcuts or misinterpretations of guidelines might seem appealing, but adherence to the specified regulatory framework is paramount. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken by Amgen employees are in full compliance with the relevant laws and guidelines, protecting both the company and the public. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification from the designated compliance department. This demonstrates a commitment to understanding and adhering to the Amgen hiring assessment test's specific regulatory framework. By engaging with the compliance experts, the individual ensures that any ambiguity in the assessment's instructions is resolved through official channels, thereby preventing potential violations. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act with integrity and uphold regulatory standards, as expected within any regulated industry, and specifically within the context of a hiring assessment designed to evaluate understanding of such frameworks. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with an interpretation of the assessment's requirements without seeking official guidance. This could lead to a misapplication of the regulatory framework, potentially resulting in an inaccurate demonstration of knowledge or even a breach of the assessment's integrity. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on general knowledge of hiring assessments or industry best practices without considering the specific and potentially unique constraints of the Amgen hiring assessment test's jurisdiction. This disregard for the precise requirements of the assessment's framework is a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it bypasses the established rules designed to ensure fair and compliant evaluation. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adherence to specific, documented requirements. This involves 1. Identifying any ambiguity or uncertainty in the instructions or guidelines. 2. Consulting the designated authority or resource for clarification, in this case, the Compliance Department for the Amgen hiring assessment test. 3. Documenting the clarification received and the subsequent actions taken. 4. Acting in accordance with the confirmed understanding, even if it deviates from initial assumptions or perceived business pressures. Question 4. The efficiency study reveals that Amgen's current data archiving process for clinical trial documentation is time-consuming and resource-intensive. A proposal suggests consolidating data into a single, less expensive cloud-based storage solution to reduce operational costs. However, this proposal has not yet undergone a thorough review by the Regulatory Affairs Department to assess its compliance with data retention and integrity requirements under the applicable regulatory framework. What is the most appropriate next step for Amgen to take? Option A. Engage the Regulatory Affairs Department and relevant data integrity experts to conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed cloud-based solution, assessing its compliance with all applicable regulations and guidelines before any implementation. Option B. Delegate the review of the cloud-based solution to the IT department, assuming they possess the necessary expertise to ensure regulatory compliance. Option C. Halt any further action on the proposal and revert to the existing, albeit less efficient, archiving process to avoid any risk of non-compliance. Option D. Proceed with the implementation of the cloud-based storage solution immediately to realize cost savings, with a plan to address any potential regulatory issues retrospectively. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the implementation of the cloud-based storage solution immediately to realize cost savings, with a plan to address any potential regulatory issues retrospectively. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's desire for efficiency and cost reduction with its ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure patient safety and data integrity. Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning the handling of clinical trial data and the reporting of adverse events. The pressure to streamline processes must not compromise the accuracy or completeness of information that could impact patient well-being or regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that are both efficient and ethically sound, adhering strictly to the specified regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing data management protocols and a proactive engagement with regulatory bodies to understand any potential implications of proposed changes. This approach prioritizes compliance and patient safety by ensuring that any efficiency gains do not lead to data loss, misinterpretation, or delayed reporting of critical information. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and relevant pharmaceutical regulations which mandate accurate record-keeping, data integrity, and timely reporting of adverse events. By seeking expert consultation and ensuring all changes are validated against regulatory requirements, Amgen demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and legal compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without a comprehensive risk assessment fails to acknowledge the potential for significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. For instance, implementing a new system without adequate validation or training could lead to data errors or omissions, violating data integrity requirements. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established internal review processes or regulatory consultation risks noncompliance with reporting timelines for adverse events or other critical safety information. This could result in serious consequences, including fines, product recalls, or even suspension of research activities. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness in data migration or validation could compromise the integrity of historical data, making it unreliable for future analysis or regulatory submissions. Professionals in such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly defining the problem and the desired outcome efficiency. 2. Identifying all relevant stakeholders and their concerns, e.g., regulatory affairs, clinical operations, IT, legal. 3. Thoroughly researching and understanding the applicable regulatory framework and guidelines. 4. Brainstorming potential solutions, evaluating each against regulatory compliance, ethical considerations, patient safety, and operational feasibility. 5. Consulting with internal and external experts as needed. 6. Selecting the solution that best balances efficiency with compliance and safety, and developing a detailed implementation plan with robust validation and monitoring. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals potential cost savings in Amgen's drug manufacturing process by suggesting modifications to existing quality control sampling frequencies. What is the most appropriate next step for the Amgen team responsible for implementing these changes? Option A. Proceed with implementing the changes that appear to have minimal impact on the overall process, deferring review of more complex modifications. Option B. Inform senior management of the potential cost savings and request approval to proceed with implementation, assuming regulatory compliance. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed changes with Amgen's quality assurance and regulatory affairs departments to ensure continued compliance with all applicable regulations and internal policies. Option D. Immediately implement the revised sampling frequencies to realize the projected cost savings. The correct answer is D. Immediately implement the revised sampling frequencies to realize the projected cost savings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Amgen employees due to the inherent conflict between optimizing operational efficiency and maintaining strict adherence to regulatory compliance and ethical standards. The pressure to demonstrate cost savings can inadvertently lead to shortcuts that compromise data integrity or patient safety, which are paramount in the pharmaceutical industry. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands, ensuring that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of regulatory obligations or ethical principles. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the efficiency study's findings by the relevant compliance and legal departments at Amgen. This ensures that any proposed changes are scrutinized against the backdrop of applicable regulations, such as those governing good manufacturing practices, GMP, or good clinical practices, GCP, depending on the study scope. Regulatory justification for this approach lies in the fundamental principle of maintaining the quality, safety, and efficacy of Amgen's products. Any deviation from established protocols, even for efficiency, must be formally assessed and approved to prevent potential regulatory violations, product recalls, or harm to patients. This proactive review safeguards Amgen from significant legal and financial repercussions and upholds its commitment to ethical conduct. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement the efficiency recommendations without a formal compliance review. This failure stems from a disregard for established regulatory frameworks. For instance, if the study suggests streamlining a quality control process, implementing it without consulting the quality assurance department, and ensuring it still meets regulatory standards for data recording and validation would be a direct violation of GMP principles. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the study's findings solely based on potential disruption, without a proper assessment of whether the proposed efficiencies could be safely and compliantly integrated. This misses an opportunity to improve operations and could be seen as resistance to necessary process improvements, potentially impacting Amgen's competitiveness. A third incorrect approach would be to selectively implement parts of the study that appear straightforward, while ignoring those that require more complex regulatory interpretation. This selective application of recommendations is inherently risky, as it creates inconsistencies in operational procedures and increases the likelihood of overlooking a critical compliance requirement. Professionals at Amgen should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a risk-based approach. When presented with efficiency proposals, the first step is to identify the potential impact on regulatory compliance, product quality, and patient safety. This should be followed by engaging the appropriate internal stakeholders, including compliance, legal, quality assurance, and relevant operational teams, to conduct a comprehensive assessment. If the proposed changes are deemed compliant and safe, a formal change control process should be initiated to document, approve, and implement the modifications. If potential compliance issues are identified, the focus should shift to finding alternative, compliant solutions that still achieve efficiency goals, or to accepting that certain efficiencies may not be achievable within the current regulatory landscape. Question 6. Market research demonstrates a significant unmet need for a new Amgen oncology therapy, and the sales team is eager to launch aggressive promotional campaigns to capture market share quickly. An Amgen marketing manager is tasked with developing initial promotional materials and is confident that the available clinical trial data strongly supports the therapy's efficacy. However, the manager is unsure about the precise wording that would be considered compliant with all relevant promotional regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the marketing manager? Option A. Consult with Amgen's internal legal and regulatory affairs departments to review and approve all proposed promotional materials and messaging before they are finalized and disseminated. Option B. Develop promotional materials based on the manager's interpretation of the clinical data, focusing on highlighting the most compelling efficacy points to resonate with healthcare providers, and submit them for review only if significant concerns are raised by external parties. Option C. Immediately begin drafting and distributing promotional materials to the sales force, instructing them to use their best judgment in conveying the therapy's benefits to physicians, as speed is critical to capitalize on the market opportunity. Option D. Rely on the sales team's collective experience and understanding of physician needs to craft the promotional content, assuming their insights will ensure the messaging is both effective and compliant. The correct answer is B. Develop promotional materials based on the manager's interpretation of the clinical data, focusing on highlighting the most compelling efficacy points to resonate with healthcare providers, and submit them for review only if significant concerns are raised by external parties. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Amgen employee because it requires navigating the complex interplay between commercial objectives and regulatory compliance, specifically concerning the promotion of a new pharmaceutical product. The pressure to achieve sales targets for a novel therapy can create an environment where the temptation to overstate benefits or downplay risks might arise. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all promotional activities are not only effective, but also strictly adhere to the established regulatory framework, safeguarding patient well-being and maintaining the company's integrity. The correct approach involves proactively seeking guidance from Amgen's internal legal and regulatory affairs departments before launching any new marketing materials. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of responsible drug promotion, which mandate that all claims made about a product must be truthful, balanced, and substantiated by scientific evidence. By engaging these departments, the employee ensures that the marketing strategy is vetted against relevant regulations, such as those governing pharmaceutical advertising and promotion, preventing potential violations that could lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and harm to patients. An incorrect approach of proceeding with marketing materials that have not been reviewed by legal and regulatory affairs is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses essential checks and balances designed to ensure compliance. Risks making unsubstantiated claims, omitting crucial risk information, or misrepresenting clinical data, all of which are direct violations of pharmaceutical promotion regulations. Another incorrect approach of relying solely on the sales team's interpretation of clinical data without independent regulatory review is also problematic. Sales teams are primarily driven by commercial targets, and their understanding of complex scientific and regulatory nuances may be incomplete, leading to unintentional misrepresentations. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed to market over thorough regulatory review, even if the data is believed to be strong, is a critical failure. Regulatory compliance is not a secondary consideration. It is a fundamental prerequisite for any product launch and ongoing promotion. Professionals in such situations should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a compliance-first mindset. This involves understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to their role and product, proactively identifying potential compliance risks, and seeking expert guidance from internal legal, regulatory, and medical affairs teams at the earliest stages of any initiative. When in doubt, the default action should always be to consult with the appropriate compliance functions. This systematic approach ensures that commercial strategies are aligned with ethical obligations and legal requirements, fostering a culture of integrity within the organization. Question 7. The efficiency study reveals potential cost savings by consolidating Amgen's third-party logistics providers, 3PL, for its European distribution network. However, the study does not detail the contractual terms with existing 3PLs or explicitly assess the impact on regulatory compliance in each European country. What is the most appropriate next step for Amgen's supply chain management team? Option A. Inform the existing 3PLs of the potential consolidation and request proposals for revised service levels and pricing to match the efficiency study's projected savings. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of all existing 3PL contracts. Consult with Amgen's legal and compliance departments to understand all regulatory implications across the European network, and then explore potential consolidation options. Option C. Immediately initiate discussions with a select few potential new 3PLs to obtain preliminary pricing and service level agreements, aiming to present a consolidated proposal to senior management within 2 weeks. Option D. Proceed with the consolidation based on the efficiency study's findings, assuming that standard contractual clauses and general European Union regulations will cover the transition. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate discussions with a select few potential new 3PL to obtain preliminary pricing and service level agreements, aiming to present a consolidated proposal to senior management within 2 weeks. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's desire for efficiency and potential cost savings with its ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulations designed to protect public health and ensure the integrity of its operations. A hasty decision based solely on efficiency could inadvertently lead to noncompliance, reputational damage, or even compromise product quality or patient safety. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that are both efficient and ethically sound, adhering strictly to the relevant regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing contracts and regulatory requirements before making any changes to the supply chain. This demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and responsible business practices. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, and regulatory oversight that govern pharmaceutical operations. By consulting legal and compliance departments, Amgen ensures that any proposed changes are vetted against all applicable laws and guidelines, preventing potential violations. This proactive stance safeguards the company from legal repercussions, maintains its reputation for integrity, and ultimately protects patient safety by ensuring the continued quality and reliability of its products. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without considering contractual obligations would likely lead to breaches of contract, resulting in legal disputes and financial penalties. This disregards the legal framework governing business relationships. Another incorrect approach that bypasses internal legal and compliance review to expedite the process would be a direct violation of corporate governance policies and potentially regulatory mandates. This demonstrates a disregard for established internal controls and external regulations, increasing the risk of non-compliance and ethical lapses. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, assuming existing processes are adequate, fails to acknowledge the dynamic nature of regulations and contractual agreements, potentially leading to unforeseen issues and noncompliance. Professionals in such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly defining the objective e.g., efficiency improvement. 2. Identifying all relevant constraints, including contractual obligations, regulatory requirements, and internal policies. 3. Consulting with all affected departments, particularly legal and compliance, to gather comprehensive information and assess risks. 4. Evaluating potential solutions against these constraints and risks. 5. Selecting the option that best balances the objective with compliance and ethical considerations. 6. Documenting the decision-making process and rationale. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates an unexpected fluctuation in a critical process parameter during the manufacturing of a key Amgen pharmaceutical product. The fluctuation is outside the defined control limits, but has not yet been confirmed as a deviation impacting product quality. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Log the fluctuation as a minor system anomaly and continue with the current production schedule without further investigation. Option B. Immediately halt all production of the affected batch and quarantine all related materials pending a full investigation. Option C. Escalate the fluctuation to senior management for a decision on whether to halt production. Option D. Initiate a formal deviation investigation to determine the root cause and impact, while continuing production under close observation and enhanced monitoring. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal deviation investigation to determine the root cause and impact, while continuing production under close observation and enhanced monitoring. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Amgen to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and make a decision that has significant implications for regulatory compliance and patient safety. The challenge lies in discerning the true nature of the observed anomaly, whether it represents a minor deviation or a potential breach of good manufacturing practices, GMP, that necessitates immediate escalation. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for prompt action with the risk of unnecessary disruption and resource allocation. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation of the anomaly, including a review of relevant batch records, equipment logs, and standard operating procedures, SOP. This systematic process ensures that the root cause of the deviation is identified and understood before any corrective actions are implemented. This aligns with the principles of GMP, which mandate that all manufacturing processes are controlled and deviations are thoroughly investigated to prevent recurrence and ensure product quality and patient safety. Specifically, this approach adheres to the principles of quality risk management, requiring a science and risk-based approach to identify, evaluate, and control potential quality issues. The documentation aspect is critical for regulatory inspections, demonstrating a robust quality system. An incorrect approach of immediately halting production without a preliminary investigation would be a regulatory failure. While seemingly cautious, it could lead to significant supply chain disruptions and unnecessary waste of product, which is not a risk-based decision. It bypasses the requirement to understand the deviation's impact and potential root cause, which is a cornerstone of GMP. Another incorrect approach of dismissing the anomaly as a minor system glitch without further investigation is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. This could mask a genuine quality issue that could compromise product integrity and patient safety. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to uphold the company's responsibility to produce safe and effective medicines, directly contravening the principles of quality assurance and regulatory compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a tiered approach. First, Assess the immediate risk based on the observed data. Second, initiate a documented investigation to understand the anomaly's scope and potential cause. Third, consult relevant SOPs and subject matter experts. And finally, escalate the issue according to established procedures if the investigation indicates a potential GMP deviation or risk to product quality. This structured process ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and prioritize patient well-being. Question 9. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the efficacy of a new drug developed by Amgen in early clinical trials, but also indicate a higher than anticipated rate of a specific, albeit rare, adverse event. The internal team is preparing a report for potential investors and regulatory bodies. Which of the following actions best upholds Amgen's commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical reporting? Option A. Highlight the efficacy improvements prominently in the report, while briefly mentioning the adverse event with a statement that further investigation is ongoing. Option B. Focus solely on the efficacy data, deferring any mention of the adverse event until a later, more definitive stage of research. Option C. Include the efficacy data and the adverse event data, but adjust the presentation to emphasize the statistical insignificance of the adverse event based on preliminary analysis. Option D. Present a balanced overview of both the efficacy gains and the adverse event data, including the observed rate and the company's planned mitigation strategies and ongoing monitoring protocols. Correct answer is A. Highlight the efficacy improvements prominently in the report, while briefly mentioning the adverse event with a statement that further investigation is ongoing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's need for accurate and timely performance reporting with the ethical obligation to ensure that such reporting is not misleading or based on incomplete data. Amgen, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight regarding financial disclosures and performance metrics. Misrepresenting performance can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of investor confidence. The pressure to meet targets can create an environment where shortcuts or selective data presentation might seem appealing, but adherence to regulatory frameworks is paramount. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the data, consultation with relevant departments, e.g., quality assurance, regulatory affairs, and a commitment to transparent reporting that accurately reflects the product's performance, even if it falls short of initial projections. This aligns with the principles of integrity and compliance mandated by regulatory bodies. Specifically, in the U.S. context, this would involve adherence to Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) regulations, such as those found in Regulation SK, which govern the disclosure of non-financial information in SEC filings. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act (SOX) also reinforces the importance of accurate financial reporting and internal controls. Ethical guidelines for pharmaceutical professionals further emphasize patient safety and data integrity. An incorrect approach would be to selectively present only the positive performance metrics while omitting or downplaying negative results. This constitutes a failure to provide a fair and balanced view, which is a direct violation of SEC disclosure requirements and can be considered misleading to investors and the public. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with reporting based on assumptions or incomplete data without proper validation. This risks disseminating inaccurate information, which can have severe consequences under SOX and other relevant regulations. Furthermore, attempting to manage the data to fit a desired narrative, rather than presenting it objectively, undermines the principles of scientific integrity and ethical conduct expected of a pharmaceutical company like Amgen. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data integrity and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the relevant regulatory landscape, e.g., SEC rules, SOX. 2. Gathering all relevant data, both positive and negative. 3. Validating the accuracy and completeness of the data. 4. Consulting with legal, compliance, and subject matter experts when uncertainties arise. 5. Prioritizing transparency and accuracy in all communications and disclosures, even when the information is unfavorable. 6. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind any reporting choices. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that a proposed change to the data logging system in Amgen's manufacturing facility could significantly reduce manual data entry time. However, The proposed system has not undergone the full validation process typically required for critical manufacturing equipment under FDA regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Amgen quality assurance team? Option A. Halt the implementation of the new data logging system and initiate a comprehensive validation process in accordance with FDA guidelines and Amgen's internal SOPs before any operational use. Option B. Seek an exemption from the full validation requirement from the FDA, citing the potential for significant cost savings and improved operational efficiency. Option C. Implement the new data logging system immediately to realize the efficiency gains, with a plan to validate it retrospectively over the next quarter. Option D. Proceed with the new data logging system, but instruct operators to double-check all entries manually to mitigate potential data inaccuracies, deferring formal validation. The correct answer is C. Implement the new data logging system immediately to realize the efficiency gains, with a plan to validate it retrospectively over the next quarter. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency gains with the stringent regulatory obligations of Amgen, a pharmaceutical company operating under U.S. federal law and FDA guidelines. The pressure to demonstrate cost savings must not compromise patient safety, data integrity, or compliance with good manufacturing practices, GMP. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that are both effective and legally sound. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed efficiency measures against current FDA regulations and Amgen's internal standard operating procedures, SOP. This includes assessing potential impacts on product quality, data traceability, and the validation status of existing processes. Prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance ensures that any changes are implemented responsibly and ethically, aligning with Amgen's commitment to quality and integrity. This approach upholds the principles of GMP, which mandate that manufacturing processes are well controlled and documented to ensure product safety and efficacy. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without adequate regulatory assessment risks violating FDA regulations, such as those pertaining to process validation, 21 CFR Part 211, and record keeping, 21 CFR Part 11. For instance, implementing a new software system without proper validation could lead to inaccurate data, compromising product quality, and potentially leading to recalls or regulatory enforcement actions. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established change control procedures, even for seemingly minor adjustments, undermines the integrity of Amgen's quality management system. This failure to follow documented procedures is a direct contravention of GMP principles and can lead to an inability to demonstrate control over manufacturing processes, a critical requirement for regulatory compliance. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to the proposed change. This involves consulting relevant FDA guidelines, internal SOPs, and seeking input from quality assurance and regulatory affairs departments. The framework should then involve a risk assessment to identify potential impacts on product quality, patient safety, and compliance. Finally, decisions should be made based on a comprehensive evaluation of these risks and a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements, ensuring that any implemented changes are both efficient and compliant. Question 11. Operational review demonstrates that Amgen is exploring partnerships with social media influencers to promote its new therapeutic product. To ensure compliance with relevant regulatory frameworks, which of the following approaches best mitigates the risk of non-compliant promotional activities? Option A. Relying on the influencer's existing knowledge of marketing, best practices, and assuming they will naturally avoid making any claims that could be construed as non-compliant with pharmaceutical advertising regulations. Option B. Approving a general theme for the promotional campaign, and then permitting influencers to develop and disseminate content without specific pre-approval, trusting their judgment to remain within acceptable boundaries. Option C. Engaging influencers who have a proven track record of adhering to advertising standards and providing them with comprehensive training on Amgen's specific promotional guidelines and regulatory requirements, followed by a rigorous pre-approval process for all content. Option D. allowing influencers to create and post content based on their creative freedom, with the understanding that Amgen will monitor social media channels post-publication for any potential violations and address them as they arise. The correct answer is C. Engaging influencers who have a proven track record of adhering to advertising standards and providing them with comprehensive training on Amgen's specific promotional guidelines and regulatory requirements, followed by a rigorous pre-approval process for all content. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to promote its products and the regulatory obligation to ensure that promotional materials are accurate, balanced, and do not mislead healthcare professionals or the public. Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates within a highly regulated environment where the integrity of scientific information and patient safety are paramount. The challenge lies in navigating the fine line between persuasive marketing and adherence to strict compliance standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all promotional activities, including those involving social media influencers, are conducted ethically and legally. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive risk management strategy. This includes establishing clear internal policies and procedures for the engagement of social media influencers, ensuring that all content is reviewed and approved by the appropriate internal stakeholders, e.g., legal, regulatory, medical affairs, and that influencers are fully educated on Amgen's compliance requirements and the specific regulations governing pharmaceutical promotion. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the potential for non-compliance by embedding regulatory adherence into the influencer engagement process from the outset. It prioritizes accuracy, balance, and transparency, thereby safeguarding Amgen's reputation and ensuring that promotional claims are substantiated and compliant with relevant laws and guidelines. An incorrect approach would be to allow social media influencers to generate content without rigorous pre-approval and oversight. Failure to implement adequate controls creates a significant risk of disseminating off-label information, unsubstantiated claims, or misleading statements, which would constitute a direct violation of regulatory requirements. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on post-publication monitoring to identify and correct any compliance issues. While monitoring is important, it is a reactive measure and does not prevent the initial dissemination of non-compliant information, which can have immediate and severe consequences. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that influencers, due to their perceived expertise in social media, inherently understand and will adhere to pharmaceutical marketing regulations without explicit guidance and training. This assumption demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adequately manage the risks associated with third-party promotional activities. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a compliance-by-design philosophy. This means integrating regulatory considerations into the planning and execution phases of any promotional activity, rather than attempting to retroactively fix issues. This involves thorough due diligence on potential partners, clear contractual agreements outlining compliance obligations, robust internal review processes, and ongoing training and monitoring. When faced with uncertainty, the guiding principle should always be to err on the side of caution and seek expert advice to ensure full adherence to all applicable regulations and ethical standards. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new AI-driven platform for patient data analysis at Amgen could significantly reduce research timelines and operational costs. However, the platform's data security protocols are still under development, and there are concerns about potential biases in the AI algorithms that could affect patient outcomes. Which approach best aligns with Amgen's regulatory and ethical obligations? Option A. Implement the AI platform for internal operational tasks that do not directly involve patient data or decision-making, while continuing to develop and test the patient-facing components separately. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, including independent validation of data security measures and bias mitigation strategies before any phased rollout or full implementation. Option C. Delay the implementation indefinitely until the AI platform's data security and bias mitigation are absolutely perfect, even if it means missing significant cost-saving opportunities. Option D. Proceed with the implementation of the AI platform immediately to capture the cost savings, with a plan to address data security and bias issues post-launch. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the implementation of the AI platform immediately to capture the cost savings, with a plan to address data security and bias issues post-launch. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates within a highly regulated environment where patient safety and data integrity are paramount. The decision-making process requires balancing potential business benefits against significant ethical and regulatory obligations. A careful judgment is needed to ensure that any proposed action aligns with the company's commitment to responsible innovation and compliance. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This means thoroughly evaluating the potential risks associated with the new technology, including data privacy, security vulnerabilities, and the potential for unintended patient harm, and ensuring that robust mitigation strategies are in place before implementation. This aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and relevant data protection regulations, which mandate that patient well-being and data confidentiality are protected throughout the research and development process. Ethical considerations also dictate a proactive stance in identifying and addressing potential harms. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings without adequately assessing the associated risks fails to uphold regulatory requirements. For instance, a decision to proceed without a thorough data security audit would violate data protection laws, potentially leading to severe penalties and reputational damage. Similarly, an approach that overlooks the potential for bias in AI algorithms used for patient selection or treatment recommendations would contravene ethical guidelines and regulatory expectations for fairness and equity in healthcare. Another incorrect approach might be to implement the technology with a move fast and break things mentality, disregarding the need for rigorous validation and oversight. This would be a direct violation of the principles of scientific integrity and patient safety, which are foundational to pharmaceutical research and development. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all potential risks and benefits, followed by a thorough evaluation of each against established regulatory standards and ethical principles. This involves consulting with legal, compliance, and ethics departments, as well as subject matter experts. The framework should emphasize a precautionary principle, where uncertainty about potential harm warrants caution and further investigation. Ultimately, decisions should be documented, transparent, and defensible from a regulatory and ethical standpoint. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the Amgen research team has identified potential safety concerns with a new drug candidate. However, the project lead, who is a close colleague of the head of marketing, is advocating for a streamlined risk assessment process to expedite the drug's development timeline. What is the most appropriate approach for Amgen to take in this situation? Option A. Engage a limited number of external consultants to review the development team's findings, but prioritize their feedback based on its alignment with the expedited timeline. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive, multidisciplinary risk assessment involving independent scientific and clinical review, alongside input from regulatory affairs, to thoroughly evaluate all identified and potential risks, regardless of the expedited timeline pressure. Option C. Accept the project lead's recommendation for a streamlined process, relying primarily on the development team's initial findings and the marketing department's risk perspectives to accelerate the timeline. Option D. Focus the risk assessment solely on risks that have already been explicitly documented by the research team, assuming that any unmentioned risks are negligible. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive, multidisciplinary risk assessment involving independent scientific and clinical review, alongside input from regulatory affairs, to thoroughly evaluate all identified and potential risks, regardless of the expedited timeline pressure. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Amgen employees to balance the need for robust risk assessment with the potential for bias introduced by internal relationships. The core difficulty lies in ensuring that the assessment of a new product's risks is objective and free from undue influence, which could compromise patient safety and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate these potential conflicts of interest. The correct approach involves a multifaceted risk assessment that actively seeks diverse perspectives and independent validation. This method is right because it aligns with the principles of good clinical practice and regulatory expectations, such as those outlined by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA. Specifically, regulatory frameworks emphasize the importance of unbiased data collection, objective analysis, and thorough review by individuals or committees not directly involved in the product's development to ensure that all potential risks are identified and adequately addressed before market introduction. This systematic and independent review process is crucial for maintaining public trust and ensuring the safety and efficacy of pharmaceutical products. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the development team's initial assessment fails because it lacks the necessary independence and objectivity. This approach is ethically flawed as it risks overlooking or downplaying potential risks due to internal pressures or a desire to expedite product launch, potentially violating the FDA's mandate to protect public health. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, even with some external input, is also problematic. While efficiency is important, it cannot come at the expense of a comprehensive risk evaluation. Regulatory bodies expect a diligent and exhaustive process, and shortcuts can lead to the approval of products with unmanaged risks, which is a direct contravention of regulatory intent. Finally, an approach that only considers risks identified by the marketing department, without a scientific or clinical review, is fundamentally flawed. Marketing perspectives are inherently biased towards product success and may not adequately capture the full spectrum of clinical or safety risks, leading to a dangerously incomplete risk assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all potential sources of bias in the risk assessment process. This involves establishing clear protocols for data collection, analysis, and review, ensuring that individuals with diverse expertise and no direct stake in the product's immediate success are involved. The framework should mandate independent verification of findings and encourage open communication channels for raising concerns. When faced with potential conflicts, professionals must escalate issues to appropriate oversight committees or regulatory affairs departments to ensure an objective and compliant outcome. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal a minor deviation in the packaging of a batch of Amgen's biologic drug. The deviation involves a slight inconsistency in the labeling placement, which does not affect the integrity of the seal or the product itself. However, it is outside the predefined specification. What is the most appropriate risk-based approach for Amgen to manage this situation? Option A. Focus on the cost and time implications of rectifying the labeling issue, and if the cost is high, proceed with release with a note in the batch record. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to evaluate the potential impact of the labeling deviation on product quality, patient safety, and regulatory compliance, and implement appropriate CAPA if necessary before deciding on batch disposition. Option C. Initiate a full investigation and quarantine the batch pending extensive retesting of all quality attributes, regardless of the deviation's apparent insignificance. Option D. Release the batch immediately, as the deviation is minor and does not compromise the product's efficacy or safety. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to evaluate the potential impact of the labeling deviation on product quality, patient safety, and regulatory compliance, and implement appropriate CAPA if necessary before deciding on batch disposition. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient product development with the imperative to maintain the highest standards of quality and regulatory compliance. Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, and any deviation from established quality control protocols can have significant consequences, including patient safety risks, product recalls, and severe regulatory penalties. The pressure to meet deadlines and market demands can create a temptation to overlook minor deviations, but a robust risk assessment framework is essential to identify, evaluate, and mitigate potential issues before they escalate. The correct approach involves a thorough and systematic risk assessment that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory adherence. This means meticulously documenting the deviation, investigating its root cause, assessing its potential impact on product quality and patient safety, and implementing appropriate corrective and preventive actions, CAPA. This approach aligns with good manufacturing practices, GMP, and other relevant regulatory guidelines, which mandate a proactive and science-based approach to quality management. By thoroughly assessing the risk, Amgen can make informed decisions about whether the product can be released, requires further investigation, or must be rejected, thereby safeguarding its reputation and ensuring patient well-being. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the deviation as minor without a proper risk assessment. This failure to investigate and document the issue violates fundamental principles of quality management and regulatory compliance. It creates a blind spot, potentially allowing a more serious underlying problem to persist, which could lead to product defects, adverse events, and regulatory noncompliance. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with product release solely based on the assumption that the deviation is insignificant, without a documented risk assessment and justification. This bypasses critical quality checks and demonstrates a disregard for established procedures, increasing the likelihood of releasing a substandard product. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the cost or time implications of addressing the deviation, rather than its potential impact on quality and safety, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. It prioritizes business expediency over patient welfare and regulatory integrity. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging and documenting the deviation. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment involving cross-functional teams, e.g., quality assurance, manufacturing, regulatory affairs. The assessment should consider the potential impact on product efficacy, safety, and compliance. Based on the risk assessment, a decision should be made regarding the appropriate course of action, which could range from immediate release with documentation to further testing, reprocessing, or rejection. All decisions and actions must be thoroughly documented and justified, ensuring transparency and auditability. Question 15. Compliance review shows that Amgen is expanding its use of real-world data for drug development research to ensure robust protection of patient privacy and adherence to U.S. federal and state data privacy laws. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment for this data expansion is most appropriate? Option A. Proceed with data collection, assuming existing general IT security measures are adequate for protecting sensitive health information. Option B. Implement extreme anonymization techniques on all collected data, even if it renders the data less useful for research. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive, multi-layered risk assessment that identifies specific data types, potential vulnerabilities, and implements tailored mitigation strategies involving legal and compliance expertise. Option D. Delegate the entire risk assessment process solely to the IT department, relying on their standard security protocols. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive, multi-layered risk assessment that identifies specific data types, potential vulnerabilities, and implements tailored mitigation strategies involving legal and compliance expertise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Amgen employees to balance the need for efficient data collection with the imperative to protect sensitive patient information and comply with stringent data privacy regulations. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential risks associated with data handling without hindering legitimate research and development activities. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data collected is anonymized or pseudonymized appropriately, and that access controls are robust. The correct approach involves implementing a multi-layered risk assessment strategy that prioritizes patient privacy and regulatory compliance. This strategy should include a thorough review of data collection processes, identification of potential data breaches, and the development of mitigation plans. Specifically, it requires a proactive stance in identifying where sensitive data resides, how it is accessed, and who has access, ensuring that all data handling aligns with the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, and other relevant U.S. federal and state privacy laws. This approach is ethically sound and legally defensible, demonstrating Amgen's commitment to responsible data stewardship. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with data collection without a formal risk assessment, assuming that existing general security measures are sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the specific risks associated with health-related data and the potential for re-identification even with anonymized data. Such an approach could lead to significant regulatory penalties under HIPAA for privacy violations and a breach of patient trust. Another incorrect approach is to over-anonymize data to the point where it becomes unusable for research purposes. While privacy is paramount, excessively stripping data of its utility can impede Amgen's ability to conduct meaningful studies and develop new treatments, which is also a failure in fulfilling its mission. This approach, while seemingly protective, can be counterproductive and may not be the most efficient or effective way to balance privacy and utility. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on IT department security protocols without involving legal and compliance teams in the risk assessment process. While IT security is crucial, it may not fully encompass the nuances of data privacy regulations and ethical considerations. This siloed approach can lead to gaps in compliance and an incomplete understanding of the risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a cross-functional team including representatives from research, IT, legal, and compliance departments. This team should collaboratively identify data assets, assess potential risks to privacy and security, and develop a comprehensive risk mitigation plan that is both compliant and practical. Regular review and updates to the risk assessment process are essential to adapt to evolving threats and regulatory landscapes. Question 16. Upon reviewing Amgen's internal processes for new drug development, which approach to risk assessment would best ensure compliance with regulatory expectations and safeguard patient safety? Option A. Relying on informal discussions among senior management to gauge potential risks based on their past experiences. Option B. Prioritizing the mitigation of risks that are highly likely to occur, even if their potential impact is minimal, while deferring assessment of less probable but potentially severe risks. Option C. Implementing a comprehensive documented risk assessment framework that systematically identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential risks across all stages of drug development, with clear mitigation strategies. Option D. Focusing primarily on risks that have historically resulted in minor financial losses, assuming that these are the most critical to manage. The correct answer is C. Implementing a comprehensive, documented risk assessment framework that systematically identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential risks across all stages of drug development, with clear mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates within a highly regulated environment where patient safety and data integrity are paramount. The risk assessment process requires a nuanced understanding of potential threats and their impact, necessitating a proactive and comprehensive approach rather than a reactive or superficial one. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with robust risk mitigation strategies. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks to Amgen's operations, products, and stakeholders. This includes considering a broad spectrum of risks, such as regulatory noncompliance, data breaches, supply chain disruptions, and reputational damage. By prioritizing risks based on their likelihood and potential impact, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies, Amgen can effectively manage its risk exposure. This aligns with general principles of good corporate governance and risk management expected of publicly traded companies, and implicitly with regulatory expectations for maintaining operational integrity and compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate financial implications overlooks the broader, long-term consequences of unaddressed risks, including potential regulatory sanctions, loss of public trust, and significant financial penalties. This approach fails to consider the ethical imperative to protect patient safety and maintain the integrity of scientific data, which are fundamental to Amgen's mission and regulatory obligations. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past experiences without a structured framework is insufficient. Regulatory bodies expect a systematic and evidence-based approach to risk management. Relying on informal assessments can lead to the overlooking of emerging threats or the underestimation of existing ones, leaving Amgen vulnerable. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes only high-probability, low-impact risks neglects the potential for catastrophic outcomes from low-probability, high-impact events. Effective risk assessment requires a balanced consideration of all risk categories to ensure comprehensive protection. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders and potential risk categories. Next, a systematic process for identifying specific risks should be implemented, followed by an analysis of their likelihood and potential impact. Risks should then be evaluated and prioritized, leading to the development and implementation of appropriate mitigation strategies. Finally, A continuous monitoring and review process is essential to adapt to changing circumstances and ensure the ongoing effectiveness of the risk management program. This structured approach ensures that Amgen's risk assessment is thorough, compliant, and strategically aligned with its business objectives and regulatory responsibilities. Question 17. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a data integrity issue during the early clinical trial data collection phase for a new Amgen therapeutic. Which of the following represents the most appropriate next step in Amgen's risk management process, adhering strictly to U.S. regulatory expectations? Option A. Convene a cross-functional team including regulatory affairs, clinical operations, and data management to thoroughly review the identified data integrity risks, validate the assessment, and develop specific actionable mitigation plans aligned with FDA guidance on data integrity and clinical trial conduct. Option B. Escalate the risk to senior management for a decision on whether to proceed with the trial without further detailed investigation or mitigation planning. Option C. Immediately implement a new, complex data management system to address the potential issue, assuming this will resolve all data integrity concerns. Option D. Document the moderate risk in the company's risk register and proceed with the trial as planned, relying on standard operating procedures to manage any emergent issues. The correct answer is A. Convene a cross-functional team including regulatory affairs, clinical operations, and data management to thoroughly review the identified data integrity risks, validate the assessment, and develop specific, actionable mitigation plans aligned with FDA guidance on data integrity and clinical trial conduct. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates within a highly regulated environment where patient safety and data integrity are paramount. The risk matrix, a standard tool for risk assessment, highlights potential issues, but its interpretation requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with regulatory expectations and ethical standards. The challenge lies in translating the identified risks into actionable strategies that protect both the company and its stakeholders. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and validation of the risk matrix by cross-functional teams, including regulatory affairs, quality assurance, and relevant scientific departments. This ensures that the identified risks are accurately understood in the context of Amgen's operations and the applicable regulatory framework. Subsequently, the development of mitigation strategies must be directly tied to the specific risks identified and aligned with regulatory requirements, such as those outlined by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for drug development and manufacturing. This proactive and collaborative approach ensures that potential issues are addressed before they impact product quality, patient safety, or regulatory compliance, thereby upholding Amgen's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the initial risk matrix without further validation. This fails to account for potential biases or oversights in the initial assessment and could lead to inadequate mitigation strategies. It also neglects the critical step of ensuring that any proposed actions are compliant with specific FDA regulations, such as those pertaining to good manufacturing practices, GMP, or good clinical practices, GCP, depending on the stage of the product lifecycle. Another incorrect approach would be to implement mitigation strategies that are not directly linked to the identified risks or that are overly generic. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the specific vulnerabilities highlighted by the risk matrix and may not effectively address the root causes of potential problems. Furthermore, such an approach could lead to inefficient resource allocation and may not satisfy regulatory scrutiny, which demands a clear and justifiable link between identified risks and implemented controls. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape relevant to Amgen's operations. This includes familiarizing themselves with FDA guidelines and any other applicable U.S., federal, or state laws. The next step involves critically evaluating the risk matrix, seeking input from diverse internal experts to ensure a robust and accurate assessment. Mitigation strategies should then be developed with a clear line of sight to both the identified risks and the specific regulatory requirements. Finally, a process for ongoing monitoring and review of the effectiveness of these strategies should be established to ensure continuous improvement and sustained compliance. Question 18. Strategic planning requires Amgen to evaluate the integration of a new advanced data analytics platform for its research and development operations. Which of the following approaches best ensures that this integration is conducted in a manner that upholds regulatory compliance and ethical standards? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that explicitly identifies and evaluates potential regulatory, data integrity, and security risks associated with the new platform, incorporating mitigation strategies aligned with relevant pharmaceutical regulations. Option B. Prioritize the technical capabilities and potential efficiency gains of the new platform, assuming that standard IT security protocols will be sufficient to meet regulatory requirements. Option C. Focus the risk assessment primarily on the financial investment and potential return on investment of the new platform, with regulatory considerations addressed only if significant issues arise during initial testing. Option D. Expedite the implementation of the new platform to gain a competitive advantage, deferring detailed regulatory compliance checks until after the system is fully operational. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that explicitly identifies and evaluates potential regulatory, data integrity, and security risks associated with the new platform, incorporating mitigation strategies aligned with relevant pharmaceutical regulations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates within a highly regulated environment where patient safety and data integrity are paramount. The need to integrate a new data analytics platform involves significant risk, as any misstep could lead to regulatory noncompliance, compromised clinical trial data, or reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to balance innovation with adherence to established legal and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment that integrates regulatory compliance from the outset. This means identifying potential risks associated with data privacy, security, accuracy, and the validation of the analytics platform against relevant regulatory standards. By embedding regulatory considerations into the risk assessment framework, Amgen can ensure that the platform's implementation aligns with its legal obligations and ethical commitments, thereby mitigating potential future issues. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical capabilities of the platform, without considering regulatory implications, fails to acknowledge the stringent requirements governing pharmaceutical data. This oversight could lead to the adoption of a system that, while technically advanced, does not meet the necessary compliance standards for data handling, reporting, or security, potentially resulting in significant penalties or the invalidation of research findings. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk evaluation is equally problematic. The pharmaceutical industry, rushing critical processes like data platform integration, can bypass essential checks and balances, increasing the likelihood of undetected errors or vulnerabilities that could have serious consequences for patient safety or regulatory standing. The professional reasoning framework for such situations should involve a multidisciplinary team, including legal, compliance, IT, and R&D personnel, to conduct a thorough risk assessment. This assessment should map potential risks against specific regulatory requirements, e.g., FDA regulations for data integrity, GDPR for data privacy, if applicable to Amgen's operations in relevant jurisdictions. The process should prioritize identifying and mitigating risks that could impact regulatory compliance, data validity, and patient well-being, ensuring that any new technology is implemented in a controlled and compliant manner. Question 19. Examination of the data shows that Amgen is considering a new manufacturing process for a key drug. While initial projections suggest significant cost reductions, there are also potential, albeit unquantified, risks related to product quality and supply chain disruption. Which approach best aligns with Amgen's commitment to regulatory compliance and patient safety? Option A. Prioritize the cost savings and defer a formal risk assessment until after the new process has been in operation for a significant period. Option B. Rely on informal discussions with experienced personnel to gauge the potential risks and proceed based on their general consensus. Option C. Proceed with the new manufacturing process immediately to realize cost savings, assuming that historical data indicates minimal issues with similar process changes. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks associated with the new manufacturing process, and develop mitigation strategies before implementation. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks associated with the new manufacturing process, and develop mitigation strategies before implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates within a highly regulated environment where data integrity and risk assessment are paramount. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely decision-making with the imperative to conduct thorough and compliant risk assessments. Misinterpreting or inadequately assessing risks can lead to significant regulatory noncompliance, reputational damage, and potential harm to patients. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all relevant data is considered, potential risks are identified, and evaluated according to established frameworks, and appropriate mitigation strategies are implemented in a manner consistent with regulatory expectations. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment process that aligns with Amgen's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. This approach prioritizes identifying potential risks, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and determining appropriate controls or mitigation strategies. This is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with regulatory bodies, ensuring product safety, and maintaining the integrity of Amgen's operations. Adhering to a structured risk assessment framework, such as one that considers both the probability and severity of potential adverse events, is a cornerstone of good pharmaceutical practice and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without a comprehensive risk evaluation fails to acknowledge the potential long-term consequences, including regulatory penalties and reputational damage. This approach is ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it prioritizes financial expediency over patient safety and compliance. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past experiences without a formal, data-driven risk assessment is also problematic. This method lacks the rigor required by regulatory bodies and can lead to overlooking critical risks that have not been previously encountered or documented. Finally, an approach that delays the risk assessment process indefinitely in favor of other priorities is unacceptable. This can result in unmitigated risks that could materialize, leading to significant adverse outcomes and regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape and Amgen's internal risk management policies. This involves proactively identifying potential risks associated with any new initiative or change, systematically evaluating these risks using established methodologies, and documenting the entire process. When faced with conflicting priorities, the framework should guide professionals to escalate concerns and ensure that risk assessment is not bypassed, but rather integrated into the decision-making timeline. This ensures that decisions are informed by a robust understanding of potential risks and their implications. Question 20. Assessment of the risk mitigation strategies Amgen should implement for its novel cardiovascular drug, CardioGuard, prior to its anticipated U.S. market launch, considering potential manufacturing scale-up challenges and emerging preclinical safety data. Option A. Proceed with the planned launch date, assuming that any manufacturing issues will be resolved post-launch and that the preclinical safety data is within acceptable variability for a drug of this class. Option B. Implement a phased launch strategy with enhanced post-market surveillance and a robust pharmacovigilance system to monitor for adverse events, while concurrently addressing manufacturing scale-up issues through parallel validation processes. Option C. Delay the launch indefinitely until all manufacturing processes are perfected and all possible preclinical safety concerns are definitively ruled out, regardless of market demand or competitive pressures. Option D. Focus primarily on marketing and sales efforts to capture market share, deferring detailed risk mitigation planning until after initial sales figures are established. The correct answer is B. Implement a phased launch strategy with enhanced post-market surveillance and a robust pharmacovigilance system to monitor for adverse events, while concurrently addressing manufacturing scale-up issues through parallel validation processes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a business objective, launching a new product, and the imperative to rigorously assess potential risks, particularly those impacting patient safety and regulatory compliance. Amgen, as a pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, making a thorough risk assessment not merely a best practice but a legal and ethical obligation. The pressure to meet market demands can create a temptation to expedite processes, which could lead to overlooking critical risks. Careful judgment is required to balance innovation and speed with the non-negotiable requirement of patient safety and adherence to regulatory standards. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that proactively identifies, analyzes, and mitigates potential issues before product launch. This includes evaluating scientific data, manufacturing processes, potential side effects, and market access challenges. This approach is justified by the U.S. regulatory framework, specifically the Food and Drug Administration's (FDA) emphasis on risk management throughout the product lifecycle, as outlined in guidances such as those related to risk evaluation and mitigation strategies (REMS) and good manufacturing practices (GMP). Ethically, it aligns with the principle of do no harm and the professional responsibility to ensure that products are safe and effective for patients. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness would fail to adequately identify and address potential safety signals or manufacturing defects. This could lead to post-market adverse events, product recalls, and significant regulatory penalties, including fines and reputational damage. Such an approach violates the FDA's mandate for pre-market review and ongoing post-market surveillance, as well as the ethical obligation to protect public health. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on financial projection without a robust risk assessment would be negligent. This ignores the potential for unforeseen costs associated with product failures, litigation, and regulatory sanctions, which can far outweigh projected profits. This demonstrates a failure to uphold fiduciary duties and a disregard for the company's long-term viability and ethical standing. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or limited internal feedback rather than systematic data analysis would be insufficient. Regulatory bodies require data-driven decision-making. Relying on less rigorous forms of evidence would not satisfy regulatory requirements and would expose Amgen to significant risks of non-compliance and potential harm to patients. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This framework should include clear stages for risk identification, risk analysis, including likelihood and impact, risk evaluation, risk treatment mitigation strategies, and ongoing monitoring. Key stakeholders, including regulatory affairs, quality assurance, medical affairs, and commercial teams, must be involved. Decisions should be evidence-based, transparent, and always prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance above short-term commercial gains.